Hey guys, do you ever find yourself rewatching shows again and again and again? I know that I do, I know my friends do too, but if you stop to think about it, it's actually quite a bizarre behavior. I think it's even more bizarre when you think about repeating shows in the context of spoilers. Spoilers are just people telling us plot points of stuff that we haven't seen yet, and we get so angry about it. We say, oh, I can't believe you told me this person was going to die in this show that I haven't seen yet. You've totally spoiled the show for me. But yet at the same time, we love rewatching shows where we have the entire thing spoiled for us because we ourselves have seen it before, sometimes multiple times before. So what is going on here? What's the psychology behind this decision making, and how does this apply to other areas of our life too? That's what I want to explore in today's video. Let's jump into it. Okay, so to explain this phenomenon, I think we should begin with something known as the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is this principle of behavioral science that says that the more we're repeatedly exposed to something in the past, the more we end up liking it. For example, children who are exposed to really weird vegetables like artichoke puree were much more likely to enjoy them than children who weren't repeatedly exposed to them in the past. The psychology behind this is this concept of processing fluency. Basically, the more we experience something, the easier it is for our brain to process, and this translates into us thinking that we actually like them more. I definitely think that this applies to the shows that we watch on streaming platforms like Netflix. Why do we love to rewatch shows? Well, it's because they're really easy for our brain to process. We've gone through this mere exposure effect. We've seen them multiple times before, and so it isn't difficult work for our brain to figure out what's going on. Familiar shows seem to have an almost analgesic property on our emotions, which means that we tend to just enjoy them a lot more, and they make for what many of us would regard as easy watching. So the mere exposure effect is one possible explanation for this kind of repeated watching behavior, but I don't think it's the only one. So to take it a step further, let's explore something else known as the paradox of choice, otherwise known as choice overload. Choice overload is this idea that sometimes too many choices actually makes it harder for us to choose, and this definitely applies to streaming platforms like Netflix. Netflix has over 15,000 different titles on its platform, which means that we have a huge number of choices for us to choose between, and it makes it very difficult for us to make that decision. This was demonstrated in research on a study done on 401k plans. In this study, participants were split into two groups, one group that was shown very few 401k plans and one group that was shown a lot. Counterintuitively, the group that was given more options on where to invest their money actually were less likely to choose one. What it seems like is going on here is that the number of choices is simply overwhelming, stressful, and leading to choice paralysis. And it's this stress caused by choice overload, which is where I see the intersection between choice overload and the mere exposure effect that I talked to you about earlier. People become overwhelmed by the number of choices available for them to watch, and so the soothing qualities of familiarity caused by the mere exposure effect makes repeating shows so much more appealing. But I want to take this analysis just one step further. Why does repeating make sense economically when we're presented with lots of different options? And to explain that, I want to play a little game with you. Okay, so in my game show, you're trying to win as much money as possible in 60 seconds, and you do so by pressing different colored buttons that give you different amounts of money. In the first round of the game show, I present you with two different buttons, one red and one blue. You don't know how much each one gives you, and so you just pick one at random. You go for the red one. Boom, you press it. It gives you $5. Not bad. And then you have a choice to make. Do you want to try the other one, the blue one, or do you want to keep pressing the red one until the 60 seconds is up? Well, in this scenario, I think it makes a lot of sense to try the blue one. After you try the blue one, you realize that it gives you $7, which is more than the red one. And so therefore, for the rest of the game, you just keep pressing the blue one and you're maximizing your earnings this way. So as you could tell in this first round, where there's a very limited number of options available to you, only two different colored buttons, it makes sense to try all of them to figure out which one is the best, because then you could keep repeating that one until the end of the game. But imagine now we progress to round 2. You still only have 60 seconds to win as much money as possible, but rather than there being only two buttons, instead we have 1,000 different colored buttons, each corresponding to a different amount of money. Now what is the best strategy for you to maximize your payoff at the end? Is it to continually explore different buttons, trying to find the one that gives you the most money? Well, probably not, because you don't have enough time in the round to try all the different buttons, And so a much better strategy is probably to just try a few different buttons and then just pick whichever one is the highest out of those ones and keep exploiting that until the timer runs out. So as you could tell in this scenario, when we have too many options and not enough time to explore them, it actually makes a lot more sense for us to repeat stuff that we know is going to give us a pretty good payoff rather than trying to continually find something that's better. So I hope you can see how this game show relates to choosing something to watch on Netflix. If we replace buttons with shows, 60 seconds with the rest of your life, and money with enjoyment from those shows, you can see that, well, we just don't have enough time in our lives to explore all of the possible shows that are available to us. So a strategy that makes a lot more sense is to not try something new every single time, but instead to try a few things until we find one that we think is really nice, and then just repeat that one very often and only try new things occasionally. Quite simply, it's just too risky to keep trying new things, and most of us just don't have that much tolerance for risk. Instead, we'd much rather fall back on something which we know is going to be pretty good. And this strategy of trying a few things and then just repeating whichever is the best again and again and again is known as satisficing. We're not trying to find the absolute best option, that's what maximizing is. Instead, we're just trying to find an option that we think is pretty good and then going with it over and over again. In this kind of scenario where we have too many options available to us and not enough time to explore them all, satisficing actually makes a lot of sense and is probably a better strategy. But satisficing actually comes into many other types of decisions that we make too. On a trivial level, think about cooking a dish like boiling an egg. Most of us don't have time to try every single variation of boiled eggs to see which one is the absolute best. Instead, most of us will simply find one type of boiled egg that we think is pretty good and then just go with that one again and again and again. But this also applies to even more meaningful decisions that we have in our lives where the parameters are exactly the same. For example, choosing who to hang out with on a day-to-day basis. There are 7 billion people in the world and we definitely don't have enough time to hang out with all of them during our lifetime. So what's the best strategy for maximizing our overall happiness at the end of our life? Is it to try and constantly make new friends and figure out who's the best person to hang out with? Or is it instead just to hang out with a few different people in our lives, figure out who we enjoy spending the most time with, and then try and spend as much time with those people as possible? Because at the end of the day, that's how we're going to maximize our happiness at the end of our life. Hey guys, Future Pete here. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and I hope that it made some sense to you. This was a really complicated topic to try and condense into a short YouTube video. In computational neuroscience, this is known as the multi-armed bandit task, and it's a really complicated model of human decision making. But the key takeaway I want you to get from this video is that as the number of new options available to you gets larger and larger, the likelihood of you trying those new things actually decreases, and instead the likelihood of you wanting to just repeat stuff that you've tried before goes up. So that's the key takeaway from this video, and you can see how this applies to watching shows on Netflix, but also to many other aspects of your life. And if you got that, then my job's done here. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please can you give me a thumbs up because it really helps me out, and I will see you in the new video. Bye bye.